Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. One of the most precious memories that I have from when I was a little kid was spending time with my grandfather. And he was this really cool guy that didn't have much education, but he was very, very smart. And he knew a lot about farming. He knew a lot about cattle. And even back during his time, he still sold mules, believe it or not. But one of the things he was most proud of was his old Ford tractor. And I'll give you a descriptor, and many of you guys are going to know the one I'm talking about. It's got a red body to it, and it's got a gray cowling over the top of it. And I know nowadays they'd probably take me away to jail for doing this, but my grandpa used to take a horse blanket and throw it over the cowling. I'd have my cowboy boots on. He would tie reins to the front of the tractor, and I would sit up on the cowling, and we'd ride back and forth across the pasture. And, you know, it was certainly a precious memory. I used to watch him plow this huge garden. To say it's a garden is kind of an understatement. It was massive. I'd watch him bush hog. I'd watch him pull up stumps with it. And tractors have multiple utility, particularly around the farm, moving bales of hay, all these sorts of things. But the one thing I can tell you that my grandpa never did when he was out plowing was, as he put that plow to the ground and he began to move forward, breaking ground for the new year for his garden, I don't ever recall hearing him say that he had recovered a skeleton. Today, we're going to talk about one such event. A fellow who was out cultivating and on a tractor all the way back in 1978, when suddenly, as he's plowing the ground, up from the ground comes the body of a young woman. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. I'd have to say, Dave, that probably one of the more thrilling moments in time, other than riding on the hood of that tractor going over the field. I don't think my mother ever saw him doing that with me. If she had, it would have been. But
not have ended well for him.
Yeah, no kidding. It would not have. But was when he let me sit in his lap and drive the tractor.
Yeah.
And tractors are pretty cool. His wife, my grandmother, came from a very rural area, and she used to talk about how she learned to drive on a tractor, and the tractor she learned to drive on, Dave, this is how far back in time it goes, had steel wheels on it and did not have rubber tires. And so tractors have always been, part of that side of my family. There were still, my grandpa had a whole collection of plows that were part. Wow. He would sharpen plows for people. There was an old generation of guys that still preferred to use plows, and he would sell them mules. He would sharpen their plows for them.
I like to go to a grocery store where it's already been done, and I pick it up, and
I know, right?
5 minutes later, I'm eating it. All right, here's what we have today. We have the story that begins with this discovery, okay? In a vineyard in, I was going to say Northern California, but the area we're talking about is Kern County.
Yeah, would they call this Central Valley?
It would be Central Valley, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's what
I'm learning, man. I'm learning.
Yeah, but when they find this body, I said they because you've got the tractor person, but you also have people who are working the fields. A vineyard, I'm thinking in 1978, it's June, and you uncover a body that, by the way, Joe, I noticed something in some of the police reporting on this, that the tractor driver noticed there was disturbed dirt. There was an area that he was going that was disturbed, so it gave him a heads up. Now, before, because otherwise, Joe, if you're just digging stuff, if you're just doing whatever, you're going to plow right through it. You're going to trample
Yes.
whatever is there, and you're going to see bits and pieces all over the place. That didn't happen here, because in this case, the tractor driver sees the disturbed ground, which would look considerably different. And I'm sure you've seen these
Yeah.
shallow graves. Now, shallow grave, it was interesting when one of my least favorite stories we've ever covered, Joe,
Yeah.
is Chris Watt in
Yep.
Colorado.
Yep.
But there was one thing that he said about the grave he dug for his wife when he was talking to the police, and they were describing how shallow it was. You know, it was 18 inches or whatever, foot and a half, 2 feet deep. It was nothing. And Chris Watt said, "Wow, I thought it was a lot deeper than that."
No.
That was his thinking. So, shallow grave, what are we really talking about when you say shallow grave and a body? Have you done these before, Joe? Have you gone out to the scene and seen that shallow grave?
Yeah. And there's an automatic default in my mind of two things, either laziness or they felt like they were being chased in some way. Actually, three things, or the composition of the soil. When you look at the Chris Watts case, when I think about that case, there's a type of soil that they have out in the West, and I think that we covered this with Morphew, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
as well. But there's been some other cases. In Texas, they call it, and I think New Mexico, they call it caliche, and it's like this really hard packed clay,
Right.
and very difficult to get through. It's not like coming down the south, right? And you're on what we call bottomland down here, where you're going to plant soybeans or cotton or anything like that. And, you know, you take a shovel and you stick it in the ground, you turn it, it's that rich, beautiful black earth, that real loamy kind of thing. And so when you're talking about shallow graves, it's going to fit into those categories. Either it's going to have something to do with they're trying to distance themselves as expeditiously as possible, or they think in their own mind that it's only going to take a little bit to obscure the body.
Oh, yeah.
The big question here, I think, is if this individual, whoever perpetrated this, had taken time and really dug down, okay? I mean, really, really dug down. Let's say they went to 36 inches, right?
Right.
Or expanded out even further, had gone deeper. Is it possible that that could have further obscured the remains, and we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now, because the body is going to degrade to such a point that there would be nothing left at all, and plus it's going to be hidden, and anything that you go over with a plow, the soil is going to get turned, and many times the remains that are contained therein will in fact be fragmented. So, and it would be really hard for a layman to, you know, kind of visually, it'd be very hard for me to look down and actually see that, yeah, this is bone fragments. Because many times what will happen with human remains, skeletal human remains, is that, did you know that they will take on many times the color of soil that is around them? Say if you've got like an iron-rich soil, it'll turn kind of a red color. It will take on these colors in certain circumstances at a chemical level.
Okay, now when this body was found, now that, by the way, to the credit of all those people who were working that day,
Yeah.
everything stopped, you know, and the stoppage was to call police right away. Now we know that the remains were found June 21st, 1978. And according to the reports, the female, they identified the remains as female, appeared to have been dead for several months.
Yeah.
Found wearing 2 white metal necklaces around her neck, one with a religious medallion. This is according to the deputies on the scene. Investigators removed the remains from the shallow grave and transported them to the county coroner's office, where a forensic pathologist performed an autopsy. Now, Joe, how would a body, remains taken from the ground out of a shallow grave, how would this body be transported, and what work would be done before the remains are moved?
Well, I can only speak to present day context.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So if we did this in present day, if we have an indication that these are skeletal remains as opposed to like a fully intact body, and they're, they're using the term partially skeletonized here. All
Yeah.
right.
There is a
Um,
comment later on, we'll get to it, about
yeah,
fingerprints. And as I was reading that, I was like, I remember the episode when you were telling me how you did that.
yeah,
And
and we can get
anyway,
into that.
yeah,
Yeah,
we're gonna
because
have to
a
because
lot of people don't understand.
hmm
But yeah, so we would identify the area, we would secure it and lock it down, keep everybody away from that area. And we're going to break this thing down into grid squares. Okay. So I've done it with kite string many times. That has happened over the years. And let's say it's each one of your grids is 12 by 12. Okay.
okay,
So you measure off with spikes or nails, you measure off 12-inch increments, um, going uh, going in the north-south plane and also the east-west plane, and then you tie off the strings, and secure them all the way down. And so at the end of it, you have a big grid area, and you go out further than you need to, right? Because you know what we've talked about in the past with crime scenes is that you expand them out as far as you can initially. This even applies to something like this. You expand it out as far as you can because you can always contract it. You can always go back and contract it. So you want to make sure that the area that you're going to excavate, that you're going to go over and above what you think is necessary. So you'll kind of have it outside that area. You'll secure it, and then grid by grid, you'll begin taking off layers. Now, in something like this, that say at the greatest an 18, or we don't really know consistently, but let's say I was thinking 18 with watts.
oh
It's a
yeah,
shallow grave. We do know
hmm
that, and shallow grave can be defined in many ways. Um, we're going to take off that top layer, okay? Because
okay,
many times you don't know what's contained in an adjacent grid. All right. Let's
right,
just say you bury a body proper, right? You have the intact body, you bury that body. Well, lots of times perpetrator will take a weapon and throw it in there too, and the weapon is going to be adjacent to the body. So just because you excavate the body that's still partially intact
hmm
doesn't mean that you're going to get that weapon if you don't expand out. And Dave, the thing about it is it's time consuming,
right,
very time consuming. I think I think now about the status of my joints and my back, my shoulders, my hips, and being in that position for a protracted period of time where you're literally bent down on your knees and you're hunched over and you're going over each little area, turning the soil, dusting the soil, and then taking that sample and putting it in a sifter off site and over to the side, and you sift it out. Everything falls down, or it's contained therein, so you can find these little bits and pieces that are left behind.
all right. Now, in this case where you've got to get the remains back to the lab, we got to
Yeah,
work on this, got to identify early on. We're talking from deputies. They look at the remains and all are thinking the same thing, that this is a body that's been here for a couple of months, 2 or 3 months. Again, we're talking June 21st, 1978. Now, they don't know how old. You could
yeah.
have some guesses. You would know if it was a child or an adult, I would think. But once you get past a certain age, I would imagine it'd be difficult, other than looking at things found with the body, maybe.
There's a couple of big tells with aging of remains, and particularly on the low end. Okay, we're
hmm
talking about someone that is younger as opposed to someone that's up in their 60 and above, that sort of
Right.
thing. So with the younger groups, stature is going to play obviously a big part in this. How tall are they? If you have the remains in total, if you have an intact remain where you can go from top of head to the heel, and forensic anthropologists have a way, they have a set grouping of numbers that they can apply to this, and some of the stuff is dependent upon race. It's dependent upon sex, okay, because males or skeletons are going to be generally more robust and bigger I mean,
Oh
that
no,
goes
no,
without
no, no!
saying.
You're wrong about that. I know you're wrong about that. That is absolutely wrong. You're making that up. This is not a political discussion, Joe.
No, no,
We are
no, no,
talking.
no. Trust me, this is a scientific discussion. And
Oh
so
well,
the other thing that you're going to look for that's really, really interesting when it comes to younger skeletons, you're going to look for eruption of teeth. So if you've got
eruption.
someone,
Wait a
yeah,
minute. Eruption of teeth.
yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, if you've got someone, say for instance, that their 12-year molars have not erupted, that's a signal.
Okay.
Okay. Do they have wisdom teeth? Which is a specific identifier because for our friends out there, that if you have had your wisdom teeth extracted at some point in time in your life, that sets you apart from everybody else that has not had their wisdom teeth extracted at that point in time. Then you look for, say, for instance, like the epiphyseal plates, like if you think about where, the growth plates in the
Yeah.
body, if they're
Okay.
if they're sealed, that gives you an idea of time because all of these they're at measured intervals, and you look for bone wear as well. So they're going to have a lot, at least I think, to go on. The trick is, do they have enough scientific data just from the onset to put a name with this unidentified young woman? Brother Dave, this area where this recovery has taken place is in a town called Arvin, California. I think that's Kern County, if I'm not
Mm-hmm.
mistaken.
Yeah.
Not knowing a lot, and listen, this is a place I've always wanted to go. I've always wanted to go to the wine region of California because I've seen photos of it. It looks absolutely stunning and beautiful, the lush rolling hills and all that sort of thing.
Hey, a sidebar. Quick sidebar.
Yeah,
After the O.J. Simpson trial, after the arguments have been made and the jury goes back, right? Well, based on the length of the trial, they expected the jury to be out for a while. So Johnny Cochran and his wife left that afternoon to go up to wine country. They'd
wow.
booked him a place. They were not even an hour and a half out of town when they got the call, turn around and come back. So
Holy smokes.
every time
And
I think about California wine country, I think
yeah,
of Francis Ford Coppola being more successful as a vineyard owner than
yeah,
as a movie director, and Johnny Cochran taking his trip there right after the trial, but
yeah.
before the verdict.
I think I've actually had some of the Coppola wine, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. It was very tasty. But this seems, for me at least, the Arvin, and again, this goes to my ignorance and lack of familiarity. It seems a bit south for this, but when you
Hmm.
look at this valley area, it's so rich agriculturally. You can kind of see the patchwork farms and everything. It doesn't necessarily, in my mind, fit with those areas that are adjacent to like San Francisco, which is, or east, I guess, east of San Francisco. It doesn't necessarily fit with it. Hopefully someday I'll be able to go out there and Kimmy and I can pay a visit at a spa or something like that
You
and
know
just
what, Joe?
relax.
Now's the time. You need to stop putting it off, and you need to go now
Yeah.
while you can still see, while you can
Yeah.
still chew your food, while you can still taste the wine. You guys need to do that.
We do. We do.
There is no reason for you not to do
You're
it.
right. And
Do it
I would
now.
love to.
Then
Uh,
go.
yeah, it just seems like and for all I know, there are many, many luscious vineyards all around the Arvin area. But here's the thing, when you do a recovery
Mhm.
in an area like this, one of the things that strikes me, Dave, now, and I guess maybe, I don't know if it's cynicism or what it is, or maybe it's just the idea that I have seen a thing or two. You know what I would come away from that scene with nowadays? I'd say, I wonder how many other bodies are out there.
Oh, wow.
Because I'm thinking, what a great area that if you would have, obviously somebody had access to this area.
Hmm.
It's not like this is a dump on the side of the road.
Right.
You're talking about a specific location where you go onto this property, you pull soil back and you deposit remains out there in that particular location.
Right.
For me, it's it's quite interesting. And I think back, I'm thinking back right now to this particular area. And you know what was going on in 78 out in California? 78 out in California, dude. That was like serial killer heyday. There were people that were working all over the place. I don't think this is too far from the, as they call it in California, the five, I think, the I-5 in the whole grand scheme of things. If somebody was aware of it and wanted to dump a body out in that area, I look at this and I really, really wonder if this was like a location of opportunity, or if it's something that maybe a perpetrator was very, very familiar with, Dave.
Well, and that would be your first look. You've got remains. They're not. Just let me go back to the public stuff here, because this is one of those cases that has so little information that has gone public over the time we've dealt with this. Again, talking about 1978, the publicly released information. The remains were partially skeletonized. Fingerprints and dental records were collected, but no identification was made using the technology available in 1978. Because of the conditions of the remains, the exact cause of death could not be determined. Cause and manner of death. Now, despite the inability to determine the precise cause of death, investigators did say this was a homicide. So we had manner but no cause. But Joe,
Yeah.
we have a partial skeletonized body. We have the attempt at fingerprints and dental records. And by the way, the fact that these are mentioned means they got fingerprints and they
Yeah.
got dental records, and they just couldn't match them with anything. So 1978, June 21st, a body that's not been in the ground that long. So they're going to know it's not a child under the age of 12, but it's going to be female over the age of 13, under the age of 100 kind of thing, right? Or is that where we're going to start narrowing this down?
I think they narrowed it down even more than that. I think that the top end of the narrowing here was like mid-20s.
Mhm.
So, and that's kind of a fantastic range, because that's kind of unique. And then if you throw race in there as well,
Right.
if you have an anthropologist that can give you a race on the skeleton, and you say, okay, this person is going to be, like you mentioned, over the age of 13 and
Right.
maybe less than 30. Well, if this is a white female and she has this stature, and you do the dental examination, and listen, the dental examination is not, it's not necessarily just for the purposes of aging the skeleton. It's also meant to, it has the utility to look back into the history of the person. I want all of our friends right now to think about, every time you go to the dentist, to have some kind of reconstructive thing take place. You have to get a filling done, a root canal, or whatever. Well, that event alone for you makes you unique among everybody else, given your demographic, whatever your race is, whatever your height is, whatever kind of injuries you may have had in the past to your skeleton, whatever kind of disease that you might have, that makes you unique. And so you further narrow this down. So let's just say that they do this postmortem charting, which I've participated in many, many times. And with a decomposing body, or a body that's greatly decomposed, let me tell you how we would do this. First off, the mandible's coming off. So you completely detach the mandible, that is the jawbone, bilaterally. Right here, there's a hinge joint right here, and you take it out and you lay it flat on the table. One of the most difficult things about doing a dental examination, either in life or in death, is you're working in a very tiny area. Okay, I know people like me have a big mouth, right? But we're not talking about how much you run it here. We're talking about being able to access the mouth and illuminate that area. So if you have the ability to remove the jaw, lay it out, and you have a forensic odontologist that can come in, that's a forensic dentist, and they'll chart these teeth out. So what are they looking for? Well, they're looking for caps, crowns, any kind of restorations that may have been done. They're also looking to see if an individual has had fillings, okay, both top and bottom. They're going to look for what are referred to, I think it's called malalignments. So if you have 32 teeth in your mouth, right, and you think about they're on an axis, each tooth is on an axis, and you've got 32. And just think about the math here. Depending upon how many degrees a tooth is rotated, that rotation is unique to you on that particular tooth. Let's just say it's your central incisor. If it's slightly pitched 2 or 3 degrees in one particular direction, that makes that tooth unique to you. And then you work that out relative to every other tooth. And the math can become quite staggering at that point in time. And then if you have little bitty things that are found along the way, maybe they've had a chipped tooth. Maybe they're absent a tooth. Maybe they had like rotten tooth that was removed and they never did anything to replace it. That does happen. And then I have actually gotten bodies identified on dental, Dave, not with looking at the teeth, but actually by the root structure. That's kind of
Wow,
cool, isn't it? So
that
what we would
is.
do if we had ante-mortem x-rays, dental x-rays, the teeth might not be telling us anything, but there's a whole other world when you get below the gum line and you do a post-mortem x-ray of the dentition and put them up. The root structures themselves, the way they pitch in the mouth and how they're seated in the sockets, that's a fascinating other world. There we have actually had dental IDs that have been done based on the root structures alone. So you've got all this stuff working here.
But now you've got the idea that you're dealing with a young woman under the age of early 20s,
Yeah.
over the age of 12. So my first thought, okay, is that, well, I'm going to look see who's missing around here. Okay. That would be, I mean, and I'm guessing pretty close here, knowing that we don't have a fully skeletonized body. We have the remains of someone who's partially skeletonized. They estimate has only been in the ground for a couple of months. So let's just take June 21, 1978, and go back. Let's just start with the new year. That gives you 6 months, Joe. And you're saying, well, they are at the time, only a couple of months in the ground. So we're looking for somebody that has gone missing in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Here's the problem, is that our victim was not reported missing. So as police are trying to identify this person, the remains of this young person, nothing's popping up.
How can that
I don't
be?
know. And what we know now is
Yeah.
even more frustrating, because that's where they started. You know, we got to identify this person. We need a place to start, and they're coming up with zeros. And again, this is before the day and age of DNA like we have now. And just so you know, DNA, fingerprints, teeth, all of that's only relevant if you're already in the system.
Bingo. Yeah. Yeah, you
If
have
you're
to have
not,
something to compare. Hey, can I go back to something
yeah,
real quick?
go.
You had mentioned that this body came with 2 white
Hmm.
metal chains, correct?
Right.
And
Yes.
they said one was a religious medal.
Yes. It
Now,
was
assuming,
a round religious medallion.
okay, well, to me, that sounds like that could be something like a St. Christopher medal, St. Michael medal, St. Jude, um, St. Joseph medal. You never know. And the thing about it is, this is going to, again, we're talking about investigations here, right?
Right.
So if you have a medal like that, many times those medals are given when you receive First Communion. Okay. And so that's significant,
Okay.
because now you framed it out. And sometimes if you flip it over, it'll have, well, first off, it's going to have an imprint where this thing was perhaps manufactured or whatever the case might be. So it's not gold medal, it's white metal. It's a specific religious medal. This person might be of one denomination that gives these things out when they receive First Communion. So do you see how this kind of
Hmm.
stacks relative to
Right.
you're looking for information? That is significant here. And if we're talking about somebody that's not over their mid-20s,
Hmm.
wow, how in the world can somebody like this that has these, I mean, I'm just thinking about this all these years later. You've got all these
Right.
points of identification. How's somebody not looking for her?
Don't know, but they weren't. That's the whole thing. And Joe, because the investigators, they hit this dead end. They could not identify the remains. And back then, now we're talking in the pre-DNA days,
Yes.
I was reading comments from law enforcement that were involved in this case for a long time. And they said, look, absent identification through fingerprints, tooth analysis, that was it. And we didn't even have a missing person report that matched up to the remains that we found. This case went cold, and it went cold fast, and it stayed cold for a long time, Joe.
Well, for me, what this says is that where this body wound up is probably not going to be the point of origin for the body. The body would have had to have come from maybe some other location. And that even narrows it down even further when I'm beginning to think about potential suspects. Who would be familiar with this particular area where these remains could be deposited? Dehydrated remains. That's one of the things that comes to mind, Dave. If they're alluding to this idea, and I promised you, we would come back to this.
Yep.
If we're talking about an individual whose fingertips, okay, are dehydrated, well, what do we have to do to roll a print? Well, we have to rehydrate. Okay, so in cases like this, the tissue is what's referred to as desiccated. That merely means dried out. So if you think about, I don't know, something like beef jerky is desiccated. All right, it's absent water. That's why you can hang on to it for so long. So how do we do this? Well, in the morgue, what we will do is we'll take a tiny syringe, and we will draw up what's referred to as tissue builder. And morticians use this all the time. People that have sunken in areas and faces, and they're trying to make them look presentable for, when the body is going to be casketed and the family views the body.
You just used a word, that all of a sudden, you said morticians.
Yeah.
And I thought of Morticia on the Addams Family. I never put those two together, man. That just hit me. It's kind of like Funyuns, onions, Morticia, mortician.
You know what's really interesting? The term mortician, I think that some in the funeral industry shy away from it now. They don't like to use that term.
Yeah, you don't hear it.
No, they use the term funeral director most of the time, but give me some grace. But the funerary arts, if you go down that road, I went to a community college in Louisiana, and this community college, I was fascinated by this. They had one of the most fantastic funeral programs in the nation, and it was very difficult to get into and very difficult to stay in and maintain your studies there. But when you're talking about trying to raise a fingerprint or the friction ridges, right? We've talked about that before. These areas have to be injected with this tissue builder. And sometimes we will actually clip off the digits right here at the first knuckle. We've got a bone clipper that we will use. We'll snip these off individually. We keep track of them. That way we can work with the fingers and inject multiple locations. This body is not going to be viewed by anybody. And so our goal here is not to maintain the body for purposes of viewing. Our goal here is to find out who this person is so we can contact the family, right? That trumps everything else. And so after the tissue expands, it's at that point in time, after you've dried it, you can take the finger itself and then roll it and get a print from that print that is left behind by the friction ridges on the tips of each finger. And Dave, my understanding is they were able to roll prints in this case, but like so many other times, they didn't get hit.
Right.
And which is not surprising necessarily, because I mean, all you guys out there, when have you ever had your fingerprints rolled? Well, maybe for job applications, maybe if you go into the military. I've had mine rolled multiple times for that purpose. And some of the government jobs that I've had, I have my prints rolled. But my prints, you're not going to find my prints in NCIC, the National,
Mhm.
Fingerprint Database. They're not going to be there because thankfully to this point, I've never been hooked up on a charge.
Right.
But
It's a
when you've
lot
got,
different now than it was in 1978.
yeah, it really is. It was a manual undertaking, if you can imagine that. One of my favorite photos of all time, Dave, is there is this classic photo. I wish I could see. I don't know. I haven't seen it in a long time. I used to teach Intro to Criminal Justice many, many years ago, and this was in one of the books. And Herbert Hoover, I think it was. He's the one that actually kind of established the fingerprint division of the FBI, and they kind of consolidated everything. And there were images of workers inside this place on roller skates.
Yeah.
It's so vast, and they've got these card catalogs, that they go through. Can you imagine how tedious that job is?
Oh my God.
Trying to match cards up and all that sort of.
Wow.
It's not my thing. I could not do it whatsoever.
And
I got a lot of friends that are fingerprint people. Tip of the cap to you guys. It is not my thing. I'll talk about it, but there ain't no way you can get me to do
it's
it.
a lot different now with computers and
It
things
is.
like that. It has changed, but still, you're only going to get what's in the system. You're
You're right.
not going to get something that's not there. You cannot, and that's the problem that happened here. You had a partially skeletonized human remains that had been in the ground for less than 6 months. You have no missing person report for the area. And again, this person becomes known as Kern County Jane Doe. That was pretty much, they had exhausted everything they could do, law enforcement, to identify this individual, and they just ran up against a brick wall. So, as it goes cold, other cases replace it. There's more going on, and then science changes everything over the years. But still, it was in 2007 when this body was disinterred to do a specific DNA test, right? They were collecting now what they needed to get for what we had. This is so interesting to me, Joe, that the people that worked this case in Kern County, the law enforcement, they never gave up on it. They didn't have to do anything, okay? They didn't need to. In 2007, they did not have to create more work for themselves. This was already a cold case. It was already done. We've got this unidentified person. Go on. Mm-mm. They did everything they could year after year to try to identify the remains. And so once they got the DNA in 2007, that began the next 19 years of work.
Right. Yeah. And isn't that
Began.
amazing? You come to the end of the rope with a lot of these cases. One of the big bugaboos here is the fact that I think that it would be very dissatisfying as an investigator on multiple layers. But, the medical examiner couldn't arrive at a cause of death. They have a manner of death. And I think people might have the question, kind of tumbling through their brains here. Okay, Morgan, you can't get a cause of death, but how is it that you arrive at a manner? Well, it all goes back to what we initially started talking about. I can tell you there's a high probability that she did not go out there and dig her own grave and pull the dirt back on her. So you have to think that there's something nefarious going on here, that somebody, for whatever reason, wanted to take her and bury her in this remote spot in a vineyard of all places, and then just leave her. And so that's where we arrive logically and come to land on this idea of classification of manner as being homicide. But after the authorities on that end, had done this disinterment and had tried to, at that point in time, back in the early 2000s, come to some kind of conclusion as to who she might be, they got bupkis. But that's when our friends at Othram enter the scene. And that's the beauty of it, because they were able to take the sample, Dave, and essentially do a DNA profile on this long since dead young woman. And as it turns out, Brother Dave, she was young, wasn't she?
My goodness. Joe, This 15-year-old girl, 15 years old. When they finally got her identity, Joe, it broke my heart and made me look at all the things that went into this. And it kind of reminded me of why this case was important to so many people in Kern County, because they had to have known. A girl in her teenage years like that, 15 years old, I'm guessing there were other signs that she was on the younger end of this.
Yeah.
But again, they did get a name, so she was no longer Kern County Jane Doe.
Yeah.
It was Arvin. Here's the key, Joe, is that this breakthrough, we oftentimes hear of how one agency doesn't work well with another, doesn't like to share credit. When it comes to this solving of a crime, identifying the victim, all that competition goes by the wayside, because you're at a brick wall, and the only way to get through it is to call Arvin, or there are other groups doing things like this, but Arvin, they wrote the book, man. And this is something we tell you every time we do a story like this, friends, and use this as your thought. If you have a case in your area where it's unsolved, you have remains, or it just can't get past this, you realize for $7,500, Arvin can start.
Yep.
And they have to crowdfund. There's no government bankroll here.
Nope.
They don't have. It's not $1 billion where they just sit there and grab the cash they need. They have to crowdfund. So you can help merely by donating $1. And that's what happened here. As they got the money to do all this, Joe, they came up with a name, and they identified Kern County Jane Doe as 15-year-old. And the other thing that gets me on her name, Joe, her name was Michelle Louise Collier, but she went by Shelley.
Yeah.
This was a person that had friends. This was a person who had family. But why wasn't she reported missing? She was last seen leaving her home, February of 1978. February 1978, and she's not reported missing. Her body's found June 21st, 1978. I don't understand what transpired there. Would like to know.
I think her point of origin is over 100 miles away, isn't it?
130 miles away in Fresno.
And again, that, for me, I got to tell you, brother, when I think about this, who would take her 130 miles away? Now, I know that there are vast empty spaces out in California, and to take a long trip over 100 miles out there for a lot of people is not a long way. You go up in the Northeast, you say you're going 130 miles away up there by car, they're like, where are you going? But out there, 130-mile trip is nothing, right?
No.
And so I think about this, though, and think, how in the world did she wind up 130 miles away from her family? We don't have all of the answers in this case, and I hate to be gloom and doom. I don't know that we ever will, but there is always hope, because, as you know, what Brother Dave and I always say is that to solve a homicide, it's best to know whose homicide it is. Who is our victim? And in this case, this 15-year-old is our victim. And many times along the way, there was probably no hope. There was no hope on the part of the police, and certainly no hope on the part of her family. They had given up all these years. But now they do have answers. They have her mortal remains, and they were able to treat them with the dignity that they deserve. I implore you that if you would just go and visit DNAsolves.com, that's DNAsolves.com. That's Arvin's website, where they list all of the open cases that they're working on. If there's a case in your region that kind of, stimulates something in your brain, maybe drives you to want to invest in this, they'll take any dough you got. You want to throw at it, the magic number is $7,500. They can flip the switch and get the machinery running. And, you never know. I know many of you out there, particularly in the true crime world, you want to know what it's like to be an investigator. One of the biggest uphill battles investigators have is a lack of resources. This is a game changer. This is a game changer in our world. I never thought that I would see anything like this technology, but you go and visit DNAsolves.com. And it's amazing what a few bucks can potentially do.
I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.